Welcome to Beyond Belief, Tales of Religious Exodus, where we delve into the personal journeys of people who've left fundamentalist religions. In this series, we explore their experiences within religion, their journey out, and how they found meaning and healing on the other side.
All right. Welcome, Nushuz, to the podcast. And we were just chatting, and you were actually explaining to me that Nushuz is not your real name. And I found it fascinating. So I guess we could start with that almost. Like, why did you choose this name as your pen name, as your pseudonym?
So Nushuz is actually a word from Quran. And in Quran, it is used to describe the women who uprise. That is the closest translation that is there for it. And then there is a lot of debate around what does that uprise mean, but it really just means uprise, like going against the will of the husband. And then you are given like different disciplinary techniques to contain those women that end with beat them. So when I started thinking about and I started working on my book and I decided that I'm going to speak up and I'm going to speak more. I knew that apostasy actually has no quiet exit in Islam. So I cannot put myself at risk. I certainly am not suicidal. So I was like, I need to select a pen name. And that sounded like a very fitting pen name to me because I owned that. I identified with that. I was like, I am the one they are talking about. I'm the one they want to subdue. So I'm going to own it and make it my own.
Amazing. So you're actually taking ownership of a term that is oftentimes derogatory, which is
Absolutely.
it parallels in the Jewish world. There's a word that called frei, which is Yiddish German, I guess, for free, and it's used derogatorily to people who leave religion. They're free of the yoke of God, and so that was traditionally an insult to call someone frei, but that is in the name of my brand, Freedom Fighter. That is me kind of owning that as well, right? So saying like, yeah, I am free, and it's a good thing. So I love that parallel. So let's start right at the beginning. You were raised Sunni Muslim in Pakistan,
Yes.
right? So tell me a bit about that. What was it like growing up in that environment?
I didn't belong to a super religious house. My parents, they used to take pride in being very highly educated, being very progressive, but at the same time, it was like the belief and the science were in the same room and they were not talking. So it was like a very uncomfortable environment where there are all these unset boundaries. Like I remember that growing up, I could not listen to certain songs because my dad will be like, oh, the words in these songs are not the right words and you should not be listening to them. I could not wear certain clothes. There was no like pressure on me to wear a hijab or anything like that. I actually wore hijab voluntarily for a while, but there was a lot of pressure in terms of how do good women live and what do good Muslims do. But at the same time, you have to be a good student, and what does that look like, and all these other expectations that parents have. Also, the other thing that I noticed, being from the majority, because in Pakistan, Sunni Muslims are the majority, there is a very strong superiority complex in Sunni Muslims. So the funny thing is that there is this stereotype where people think that Muslims are like a monolith and all Muslims are the same. And literally, there are like Sunni Muslims and Shia Muslims and Ismaili Muslims and conservative Muslims and progressive Muslims, all these different types of Muslims. And every single one of them is convinced that they are right and everybody else is not Muslim. Um, so in Pakistan, when you're a Sunni Muslim, you're like, oh, yeah, I am the Muslim and everybody else is wrong and they're going to hell.
Okay, so it's that extreme. It's like if you get it wrong, you're going to hell because we have the right formula for
Yeah,
for getting into
we have the
heaven.
right formula. They even in Pakistan, like they have this widely prevalent sentiment where they say kafir, kafir, Shia kafir, as in, they declare that all the Shias are kafir, like infidels. And obviously, by definition, infidels are destined to hell.
Very interesting. Yeah, I always love the parallel with certain Hebrew and Arabic, and I guess you don't speak Arabic in Pakistan, but some of the words probably from the Quran pass over. We call it a kofir. So it's the same word, and then we, with Yiddish, it's koifer, and so again, we own that term at this point, right? But yes, everyone's a koifer, for sure.
Exactly.
And yeah, go on.
One thing that I do want to say, although we don't speak Arabic, but we all learn Quran in Arabic, so we do understand a lot of Arabic. And when you leave Islam, it's like you need to say one sentence to come into the circle of Islam. And when you want to leave, you need a PhD in Arabic linguistics. So at this point, like, I know Arabic quite a lot, but it is very, very interesting to see all those parallels that we have seen in Abrahamic faiths.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I haven't interviewed nearly as many Muslim people. The people in my circles are Jewish, of course, and then to some degree Christian because we're in North America. But when I did interview a Muslim couple in the previous episode, I was struck by how Judaism seems to be in between Islam and Christianity, at least the type of Judaism that I was raised in. And that was a very interesting thing. One thing I was going to ask you, there's a reputation. I grew up with knowing very little about Islam, even though I grew up in the Middle East. But one thing, there was a reputation that the Shia Muslims are fanatics and the Sunnis are moderate. That was a stereotype, and I'm curious if you could speak to that.
Honestly, it varies from place to place. Like, for example, Iran is mostly Shia population. Iraq is mostly Shia population. There are a lot of extreme people in there. But what I have seen in Pakistan, for example, I have found Shia people to be a lot more open and a lot more progressive than actual Sunnis, and a lot of dominations within Sunnis. So, in my personal experience, I won't say that that is true. But I know that generally, looking at Iran, for example, there are a lot of extreme Shia population out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fascinating. Are there any laws in the writing itself? You know how you have people who pick and choose from the text or from their beliefs the things that they follow, so they're moderate because they're ignoring half of the teachings. That's very common in the raw teachings of Sunni versus Shia. Is there one that is more extreme than the other, and the things that, like, if you go by the book?
Honestly, so where the Shia and Sunni domination started was post the period of Prophet. So
Right.
basically, it started when they started debating between who wants to be the first caliph, and should it be Abu Bakr, should it be Ali, and that is where it started like diverting. So within the teaching, within the Quran itself, there are not. But I will give you some examples. What Shias do, a lot of them just discard parts of Quran. So, for example, they will just totally discard that certain ayahs. They will say, "Oh yeah, Umar made it up, and Aisha made this one up, so we are not going to." And Aisha actually went on a war with Ali, so they don't respect Aisha a whole lot, except for when it comes to Aisha's age. Every Shia person will fight you to death that Aisha was 18 years old, because somehow that is like the legally acceptable age to marry a 53-year-old. So, Aisha was 18 years old, and they will have all these linguistic gymnastics and circumstantial evidence that to prove that that is true. But outside of that, they actually don't even consider part of the Quran to be accurate. I remember one time in the US, I had a friend who was originally from Iran. And I asked her that, what do you believe in Iran? Like, do you actually believe that parts of the Quran are just not correct? And I was Muslim at that time. And she was like, oh, yeah, because they were written on, and there were parts of the Quran that were actually, that are not even there because they were written on a leaf and a goat ate the leaf. And I was like, that does not even make sense to me. Even at that time, I was like, how would goat eat the leaf if the god doesn't want the goat to eat the leaf? Like, and why can't God send those words again? That doesn't make any sense to me. So I think that generally, because they don't even consider part of the teachings to be true or relevant, they are a little bit more selective. Shias are a little bit more selective than Sunnis. You will see a lot of very conservative denominations in Sunnis where they actually consider not just non-Muslims but anybody who is not a Sunni or within their denomination their friend.
Right. Kufr, kufr, Shia,
Yeah,
kufr.
kafir, kafir, Shia kafir, and also they will say things like, if somebody believes in this or that. For example, there are Quranists that will totally be like, oh yeah, all this hadith is trash, and then there are people who call themselves Ahle Hadith, and they basically put a claim to loving hadith and advocating for hadith, and all of that is correct. So then they would consider Quran as not even Muslims because they don't believe in hadith. And
Mm.
now the Quranist folks have this thing of where they will say, oh yeah, hadith was compiled like hundreds of years after Muhammad's death, which is true. But then Quran was also compiled many, many years after Muhammad's death. And actually, there were times that Usman, who was the one compiling Quran, he burned parts of it, and he was looking at it and was like, "Oh yeah, this one doesn't look right. This one doesn't look good." Like it is the same story.
Right. One last question. What is the age of the woman? Well, I think it's Muhammad's wife actually when it's written, like without saying that she was 18. What's the official or literal age?
So the age that she reported herself, that is in several correct hadith books. Labeled as authentic, was that she was 6 years old when they got married and 9 years old when they consummated the marriage. And there is
Got it.
all kinds of gymnastics around it where they are like, oh, you know, I've actually written an article about this, like a whole analysis of what is the evidence out there and what is the reality. And there is this very interesting thing of, oh, this was post puberty. Let me ask you, like, even if we consider it that somebody started bleeding at 9, does that make them like suddenly overnight into a mature woman who is okay to be quote unquote married to a 53-year-old polygynous man? And then the other thing over there is that Aisha was the third wife of the Prophet, and all these Muslim people will say, oh, she was a scholar. Because, like a traumatized kid, she basically shared a lot of appropriate and inappropriate details of her personal life, lack of boundaries, which is, in my mind, it's a sign of trauma. But she shared that, and because she has like contributed over 2000 hadiths, so that's why she's a scholar. She's a scholar for everything until it is about her own age. All her words are golden until it is about that she said that I was 6 when he married me and I was 9 when he consummated.
Right. There's an interesting parallel where it doesn't say it in the actual text of the Bible, but there's a add-on teaching that Rebecca, when she married Isaac, was 3 years old when she agreed to go with him. And then they do all sorts of explanations how he waited for it to be an adult before they did stuff. So I love those parallels. But I want to bring things back to your own personal. We could talk religion all day long, and there's a lot that I don't know, but I would love to hear more of your story. So as you described it, you're growing up in this like between two worlds because your parents are highly educated and supposedly liberal, but then there's all these random beliefs that are like literally in conflict. Do you remember specific examples of some of those laws that maybe like really didn't work for you or that you found really strange as a child?
Yeah, what I found really strange as a child was the status of women in Islam. And my earliest memory is like my dad, who was highly educated, and my mother, who is also highly educated. And my mother always made more money than my dad, frankly. She had zero control over money, because, my dad, like in a typical selective cherry picking manner, he would be really progressive when it comes to other things, but he would suddenly be kavamoon and head of household when it comes to who is going to control the money. And then from there, I also saw him, like, literally, there were times that he would randomly turn around on small things and he would slap my mother. And, casual domestic violence, like nothing like he's breaking her bones or he's terribly beating her up, but literally her self respect was down to zero. Like, I remember times that we were walking on a crowded street and he got annoyed on something and he turned around and slapped her. And then later on, because I was so traumatized, he would explain to me that it is okay for him to do that when his wife is disobedient, because Quran gives him that right. And that is where really, like, I really thought that those laws were problematic. And I went through this cycle of reading more and misunderstanding, and the typical apologetic, okay, maybe there is this alternate meaning, look, somebody said something different. And I went through cycles, but the more I dug and the more I read, the worse it got.
Right. So we'll dive more into that. I'm curious, like those different flavors that we often have to go to in this process of deconstructing. So what struck me is I'm curious, specifically your mother, right? She's on the receiving end of religion, basically. What was her relationship with religion, from what you could see?
Oh, actually, she was a lot more religious than my dad. And at this point, like, both of them have performed Hajj. They are a lot more religious than they even used to be before. But, even at that point, like throughout my life, it was my mother who I saw praying 5 times a day and telling us to pray repeatedly. Like, when I started wearing a hijab, although she never wore a hijab, but now she does. But at that time she was like, oh yeah, that's great, like that's fantastic, if you want to do it, just stick to it. And then when I wanted to take it off, she was the one who never wore a hijab up until that point in her life, but she was throwing a fit, like, you made a commitment, and you made a commitment to wear a hijab, so how are you going to take it off now? So I actually used to ask her a lot of questions because, like most kids, I was very close to my mom. And I used to ask her, like, why are you okay with it? Why are you okay with this man, like my dad, hitting you? And why don't you just leave? And she'd be like, again, oh, because Allah does not like divorce. Allah does not like divorce when it is initiated by a woman. Let me tell you that, because Quran itself actually has a verse where Allah gives men who are already allowed unlimited number of concubines and 4 wives an allowance for just replacing a wife if they are at capacity and they want to take a new one. So Allah does not have a problem with divorce in those cases, but if a woman initiates a divorce, in some cases, if she does not have the right reason, she cannot even smell heaven, because Allah hates that. So Allah hates divorce. The man has a right to hit me. And then, her traditional typical sentence used to be, it is better to stay at home and be abused by one man versus not stay at home and be abused by the whole world.
Mm. So this
So,
attitude that the world is unsafe kind of thing.
yeah,
Do you tie that to religion or to just the culture of?
both.
Mhm.
Both, because the world is a very unsafe place for a divorce for men in Pakistan.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So there's that. Because to me, it's always an interesting conversation. People, the apologetics around religion will always try to blame the worst parts on culture. They'll be like, "Oh, the Bible is good, but Orthodox Jews, they're human, so they abuse children, right?" and then you have to go back and say, well, here's the text, right? And to me, that's always the biggest damning thing. This is the text, this is how people are being raised, and they're using the text whenever they feel like it, like you described just now.
Yeah.
um
And
so
one thing that
yeah.
I would like to add there is that, not only do they do that, but also the culture is coming from somewhere. There is something that is shaping the culture. And if there are things that are happening in Pakistani culture, and Irani culture, and Afghanistani culture, and Iraqi culture, and Arab culture, places that are not even geographically close, then the thing that is contributing to those cultures commonly is the religion.
Mm. Yeah, so you're saying it can't be pure culture because this is a very diverse set of peoples, and if you see a trend amongst them, the common denominator is this shared religion that they all have. So I really like that. It's a great piece of evidence, basically, or a great argument. So I'm curious though, because so there's parts of that aren't working for you, but then you did mention things like taking on a hijab. So did you go through a period of time where you actually became more devoted? This is quite common, and that maybe you're alluding to that.
Yeah, actually, because I was a very curious kid, and growing up, I was like, okay, maybe Islam does hold all the answers, and that was all around me. So I was like, my journey really started with wanting to become a better Muslim. So I did not set out in anger and rebellion. I did not set out to say, I'm going to prove that Islam is not the truth. I actually set out to say, oh, I want to be the best Muslim that there is, and I want to make it to heaven. And, I'm going to do all the right things. And one of the things that actually drove the desire to wear a hijab is very sad. It is very, very common in Pakistan for people to just like touch and grope young women who are out there on the street. And one day when I was reading Quran, the actual like orders in Quran where they have instructed hijab, they say that tell women to wear a hijab essentially so that quote unquote they don't get harassed. And that was like, I was like, oh, so maybe I'm getting harassed because I'm not wearing a hijab. So let me go try that and wear a hijab. And guess what? I wore a hijab and the harassment increased. So because, people start seeing you as even more vulnerable when you wear a hijab. So I went through this cycle of wearing a hijab. Then I was like, okay, maybe I'm not wearing it right. So I'm going to become even more conservative and wear a niqab. And the more I did, and the more I saw that the promise of they don't get harassed does not uphold, then one day I was like, you know what? This is just useless, and I'm not going to do that anymore. In this heat, I'm very uncomfortable, and this is not right.
Hmm. Amazing. Yeah. So at what age was all of this happening? This sort of trying to not be harassed and
When
experimenting.
all of this happened between the ages of 13 and 20.
Okay. So as a teenager, you're trying to be the best Muslim you could be. You're trying to start like surviving in the world, but using the guidance of Islam, of the religion, to help guide you. Like, oh, this bad things are happening. How do I get out of these bad things? By following the laws better, because they're
Right.
supposed to save me. Fascinating. So you went through the period where you tried harder. How did that start ending? How did that, I guess, unravel?
You know, actually, as a young person in my early 20s, I came to the US. And in the US, even when I came to US, I was very religious at the time. I was a part of many tri-faith initiatives in my city where we used to try to bring together Christians and Jews and Muslims. And I used to like talk to them and tell them about how great Islam is, and how feminism in Islam is where I used to try to tell them, oh, look, our first lady Khadija was like a working woman. Well, Khadija was working 20 years before Islam. So, all of that, the more I researched for those initiatives and the more I dug, the more problems I found. I found hadiths that say women are deficient in intellect, which at this point I know that women surgeons actually have better outcomes than men surgeons in many cases. Women lawyers actually have great records compared to men lawyers. So it's not even true. And then I found several hadiths that say, okay, yeah, you can hit them, just don't hit them hard, like hit them lightly and that kind of thing. And I was like, okay. And then the more scholars I talked to, so I started talking to scholars. I was like, I'm having these doubts. I'm a part of these initiatives. I want to be able to explain these things and answer these questions. And they started pointing me to the books and all these apologetic explanations on read this article and this is not true and that is not true, and you can translate this differently, and tell them that they can interpret this differently. And then came the whataboutism, like you were talking about Rebecca, right? So, oh, if they ask you about Aisha's age, just bring up Rebecca. Just say that, oh, if Aisha was 6, Rebecca was 3. And how do you feel about that? So I was like, how is whataboutism an answer to the religion that is claiming that we are the best religion, we are the divine truth, and everybody else, including Judaism and including Christianity, is corrupted because they included things in their religion, but we are not. We are going to be eternally true and good. And how is this behavior okay? Now, one thing that I say, Muhammad was a man of his time. And at that time, like child marriage was something that happened. And okay, I understand that. But then you cannot call that man the best example for all humankind in all times. Because one of those things is not true. Either he should not have married a child and ordered people to be killed and did massacres on Jews of Medina and all that, or he, if he did all that, then he's not the best example for all times.
Yeah, I love that. To those 2 points, we have a parallel in again the sort of evangelical Jewish stuff that I was raised. Everyone's always pointing about, well, I was raised to like hate Christians, like Christians, like on a broad level, especially in school, less at home. Like Christians suck. They're full of shit. Basically, they're not. What they don't know what they're talking about. They're all idiots, theologically especially. But whenever it was necessary, everyone would point out that the Bible was the best-selling book of all time. Right? Suddenly, the Christians' behaviors was some sort of endorsement of what we do, but you don't even respect them at all. You don't even care what they do. So I remember being struck by the same kind of thing. And then to the last point, it's exactly the issue where religion is like a snapshot in time of something that happened, hundreds, thousands of years ago, right? And so you fine, snapshot in time. That's what it was. Everyone was doing this. But then you evolve, everything else evolves around it, and it stays fixed, and the people are fixed on saying that it is true. And so you end up with these huge mental gymnastics that people who are otherwise progressive have to do in this area. And you end up with crazy cognitive dissonance and apologetics. And it's the more you explore how it actually is happening in parallel in multiple religions, the more it all unravels at the same time. Like
Right.
you realize that it's all the same kind of thing. Like I only know about the Jewish apologetic books, and a part of my website is devoted entirely to making fake book covers of the style of art that they have. But that was I'm sure you have your own books that are, that kind of thing. And they oftentimes have like sunlight coming through clouds, right? There's always there's a look. Anyways. So you were in the US already. You're still trying to be active. The scholars you were talking to were within Islam, like imams or whatever you would call them in your tradition.
Yes, they were with Islam. So I talked to several like contemporary imams. Like at one point, I used to be a fan of Numan Ali Khan. This is before all his scandal with women and all that happened. I was like, oh yeah, he's a very modern person. He is like, he knows what he's talking about. Let me talk to him. So I was emailing them. Thank God that I was not one of the women that, that he molested and all that. So, then I was also contacting imams back home that I had prior relationships with, and they had helped me like learn. At one point, I actually enrolled in a formal like alima type course, which is like just to educate myself more in Islam. And like I said, it all ended with Allah knows best. Like their favorite line is that there comes a point that they're like, oh, we can only tell you what is in front of us, but Allah knows best. And Allah works in mysterious ways. And there are things that we just don't understand because it is not our place to understand, but it is also not our place to question. And obviously, with all of that, the thing that I also started learning, like, so far we have been talking about the social issues, but I'm a scientist. And, the more I learned and the more I read, I was like, what is all this scientific errors and goobly dook in there, for lack of a better term? So, why are we thinking that a donkey actually flew out to outer space and took someone to heaven? Why are we thinking like the embryology? Actually, that's in Quran, that people always say, "Oh yeah, embryology in Quran." Like, oh my God, that's a miracle of Quran. If you look at that embryology, that is the knowledge that was there in second century, that was already present in Arabia at that time. And it is down to the mistakes in embryology. It is like, the knowledge of the time. So I'm like, a god, if we think that there is a god and that god actually made human beings, they would know how they did it. They would not like say, oh, you were a clot at one point, and then there are all these linguistic gymnastics of, oh no, it means like clinging object. Clinging to what? Like when you when you get conceived, you are not clinging to anything, I assure you. So, it's like this leash like substance. It's like, what does that even mean? So the more there is something in Quran that says that mountains actually stabilize the earth. And it's like
Mm.
mountains are themselves like evidence of activity of the plates underneath them.
Yeah.
So
Which is unstable. They're
unstable.
expressions of an unstable.
Yes, so there are actually more earthquakes in a lot of mountainous areas. What are you even talking about? So those were the kind of things that one day, the moment that happened to me was that I was reading the Quran and reading the translation, and I realized that in my heart, I know that this is not the word of God. I know that this is written by human beings. It is full of errors. It is full of, bad social advice and not applicable to the times that we are living in. And then there was no going back because, religion is all about the faith and the blind faith. And once you have lost the faith, then, once you see the truth, there is no going back.
Yeah, I love that this moment actually happened for you while reading the text. It's very appropriate, ironically, from an act of devotion, if you will. I just a few things to clarify. You said emerology, and I'm actually not familiar with that term. What does it mean?
So embryology is like,
Oh, the study of embryo.
yeah, the study of
Okay.
embryo.
Embryos. Okay. Yeah, it's fascinating. I reminded one of the big celebrated Jewish scholars is around 1100 years ago, Maimonides, and he was a physician in Egypt teaching. And so he had extensive writing, and he did transform some of the leading texts. He has his texts are still studied today. But if you start chapter 1, first one is, let me explain to you how the world works. And he immediately starts by explaining that all the planets, including the sun, revolves around the earth. That's point number 1, chapter 1, verse 2, basically. And then everything else, he goes on and he explains what's kosher and what's not kosher and how to live your life and stuff like that. I remember asking my father-in-law, who was an esteemed rabbi, it's like, it's in the same book. And we know that this is wrong. How come this is right? And the apologetic answer that he created of like, oh, when he's talking about science, we disregard it because science evolves. But when he's talking about the word of God, like I was like, he says it all this. He in his book, they're all exactly the same. There's no like end the speculation here, begin actual law. And you're making that distinction to make sense for yourself. It's really absurd in those cases. So again, I love the parallels and the different religions. So you have this moment where you realize that you don't believe in it anymore. Oh, I had one more question for you. You implied that you were like continuously like researching verses and finding these verses, discovering verses. Was your knowledge of the Quran an evolving one, different, I guess, than like a male? Is this related to like how much men are taught versus women are taught, or is it just really extensive and a lot of people don't know? I'm curious about that aspect of like knowledge of the texts.
So I'll tell you that I don't think that most Muslims actually understand Quran. I don't believe that they have actually read Quran. The translations are so wildly different There are actually, like, there is a person who translated Quran. Her name is Lala Bakhtiar, and she translated Quran. Her translation is called, I think, the Sublime Quran. I might not be getting the names right. I'm sorry about that. But if you actually look at that person, like, she was a very modern person. She has like, she never wears a hijab or anything like that. And then she has all these, oh, there are these alternate meanings of daraba. And there is like, this verse can be translated like that. They really gloss over the fact that, for example, the entire Quran does not mention a woman's consent even one time. And they just gloss over it. Then there are some translations out there that actually will get around the fact that it does not mention consent, for example, by inserting consent in parentheses. And the word is not there in actual Arabic. Like, I have had this conversation with Muslims where they're like, oh yeah, look at this translation and it says that, a woman has to consent. And I'm like, can you point to me like which word in Arabic there actually means consent? And then they will fumble around and then they'll be like, but that is the intention. Like, how do you know God's intention? Did God communicate that to you? Apparently God did not communicate that to you. So to answer your question, I think that there is not a difference in the way we are taught about it. I think that basically but there is a difference in how different denominations actually tell children about, okay, this is what you're supposed to do, and this is how you're supposed to behave, etc. And people, for the most part, just rely on those messages that they're getting in the mosque or in the house. They actually don't bother to pick up the book and actually read it, analyze it word by word, and say, what does this actually mean? What is it actually saying? What I'm being told, why is that different from what I'm being told?
Yeah, the cultural filter through which it comes, and people suffice with that. I am continuously shocking people with knowledge of, with laws that they're like, oh, I didn't know that that law is there, right? And the religion thrives on the ignorance of the masses in a lot of ways, actually, and that's fascinating. I was going to ask you, what you're a scientist. What is your specialty broadly, if you're okay?
I work in medicine.
Okay,
Mhm.
nice. So in the medical field. So let's go back to that point where you're reading the Quran and you realize, okay, this, I don't believe that this is true. In my heart, I don't believe it. So what happens next?
You know, the journey of unlearning and leaving, I will explain it to you in terms of neurosciences. So neuroscience is basically what happens that every time we repeat something, there is a synaptic connection in our neurons, that basically there is a pathway. And over time, when we keep repeating it, those pathways become highways. So basically, what is happening actually in your brain, like, it is not even about how you're feeling and all that, but actually what is happening in your brain is when you deconstruct and when you say, I don't believe this anymore, then your brain does not have that highway to run anymore. Then you're basically trying to build a broken road and trying to build a new road for yourself. So it's like, it literally feels like dying because neurologically, you are dying. You are creating a new self, and you are trying to find a new identity. So initially, when that happened to me, I did not understand it like that. And it was very, very painful. Like, because your identity as a Muslim woman is ash, your certainty is ash, your community is ash. You don't know where you go from here. You don't know if you're wrong and you are going to get thrown in that eternal fire. You don't know what's going to happen. And it is only through, I always advise people, keep walking when things are bad, because you're going to find your way. So it is only through learning more, reading more, and building that new highway in your brain and giving it a path forward that you actually come out of it. So that is what happened to me. I went through all 6 stages of grief before coming to acceptance and meaning of what does this mean for me and how do I move forward. There was a point that I actually went to my husband And my husband is more of a cultural Muslim. He's actually more doubting than me, although he has never said out loud that he's an ex-Muslim, but I know that he is. So he I actually said to him that I totally understand and respect if you want to be married to a woman who is a Muslim, but I am not anymore. So I would totally understand if you want to part ways. And he was like, are you crazy? Like, I have actually doubted, always doubted more than you. I have always been more vocal than you, and why would I ever do that? It does not matter to me. So I think that was like one of my first actions. My second action was that I just continued to read and I just continued to ask questions, but in a different direction. I started talking to more ex Muslim people, and I was like, how did you find your way? What happened to you? How did you find your community? So that is what happened next.
Nice. How long did that take, that period of time? And maybe you're still in it, but this arc of like, put one foot in front of the other, you just got to keep going.
Um, Actually, to be honest with you, I think not very long. I think that within 2 to 3 years, I was at a place where I came to acceptance. What actually took more time was being vocal and finding a meaning. Like, because there is this sentiment in Islam where they say, like, even progressive Muslims who say, oh, yeah, these apostasy laws or blasphemy laws should not be there. They will very nicely say, as if it is a really nice thing. Actually, you are not punished for apostasy, you are punished for being vocal about it. It's like, why am I being punished for being vocal about my apostasy? Like, what? How does that make sense? But even progressive Muslims don't support being vocal about these things. So it was the finding the courage to be vocal is where I really started seeing that change. And that was like, that took a long time. So I started being vocal, more vocal around, like, I would say about 5 years back. That's when I started writing my book. I was like, I'm not going to be silent anymore. I'm going to speak up about it. I started talking to more people, like, openly. And the fact that I'm in the US helps, because if I was in Pakistan, I probably would have been killed by now. So I think that was the real turning point.
Hmm. Yeah, it's been insightful for me to realize how something that I do very freely at the end of the day, in in the Jewish world, I think even Christians, you just get up and you say y'all full of shit and you move on, and that's not even allowed in Islam.
No.
And how much courage it takes to literally just criticize that kind of thing. If you I know, like in Saudi Arabia, they could formally kill you
Yes.
if you are a heretic. And in Pakistan, is it like that, or is it more like sort of evangelists?
So in Pakistan, it is they have blasphemy laws, so they can actually formally kill you for blasphemy, and they don't have that apostasy law like Saudi Arabia has. But blasphemy law is very easily extended to apostasy. And any criticism, even a question, can be framed as blasphemy. And honestly, a lot of those don't even go to the court of law. It is just like an allegation, like somebody standing up in a mob and saying, oh, this person disrespected Quran, or they questioned something in Quran, or questioned something in Muhammad's life, is enough to get you killed on the spot. So let me tell you an interesting thing that happened actually recently. There was a woman in the city of Lahore. She was wearing a shirt that said halwa. Now halwa is an Arabic word which means sweet. um,
There's a famous like there's a food that we call
Yeah,
halva,
they're
and it's,
halwa,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
And it's like, it has nothing to do with Quran. It is not a word in Quran. So all these, like, self-righteous people who probably cannot even read Quran because they cannot say what that word means, are like, oh, it says something in Arabic on her shirt and she's disrespecting Quran. And they literally almost killed her. If the police had not gotten there on time and saved her, she probably would have been killed. And she would not have been the first. Like, there are so many blasphemy deaths that have happened in Pakistan and continue to happen every single day.
Hmm. Does Pakistan formally have the death penalty?
The death penalty for
They
blasphemy,
do have the death
yes.
penalty for blasphemy. Do they have death penalty for other things too, like murder or things like that? Or
Yes, they do.
they do. So there's death penalty in Pakistan, and one of them is violating and blasphemy as opposed to apostasy. Apostasy is I don't believe in Islam or I don't believe in Muhammad, which is more strict. Blasphemy is speaking out against the prophet in a way, like making an image of him. Or is that accurate? The distinction?
Blasphemy is like the way it is defined in Pakistan. So there have been deaths. So, for example, there was a Christian couple that actually died. I have an article coming out about it. Um, but what happened was that she mistakenly burned a few pages that had Quran on it because she was cleaning out her father-in-law's room after his death, and she did not know what it is. She was a Christian, she could not read it, she did not understand it. She just like simply burned them, and somebody saw the burned pages, and both the husband and wife were killed because they burned Quran, and that was blasphemy when they are not even Muslims. So I don't know how that is even applicable, but literally anything. I will tell you this. Yesterday I saw this news where somebody was playing a football. Somebody was playing soccer, essentially what we call it football in Pakistan, but we call it soccer here. And they were playing soccer with this ball that had flags of all the nations on it. And that also had the Saudi flag on it, which actually has like the Muslim kalma, like the sentence that you have to say to accept Islam, which is La ilaha illallah Muhammadur. That was considered blasphemy. That a kid
But they
was
were
trying
kicking
to
it
soccer,
around. Yeah.
yeah, that you're kicking it around, and it's like a holy phrase, and you're kicking it around. The
Yeah.
kid probably has no idea like what is even going on.
And he might not speak Arabic. That's the weird paradox here is that a lot of this is happening in Arabic, but that's not the spoken language on the street. So
Yeah,
you have to be at least somewhat educated to know that you are breaking the law, but oftentimes nobody cares.
right.
It's fascinating. I mean, yeah, I'm curious. This is a bit of a tangent, but it might be a good time to ask it. I'm always vexed by there's a paradox in the liberal society, which we live in and we benefit from broadly, of like, oh, well, I have my religion and you have your religion, so everybody's fine, and like you live and let live. Ironically, with that, when it comes to Islam in particular, it ends up enabling a lot
Yeah,
of, of violence and negativity. And it's paradoxical. The liberals are supposed to be saying yes to everything, but when you say yes to something like this, oh, it's just your beliefs, you end up validating this kind of stuff.
absolutely. So I will say that the biggest example of this is hijab. So there are all these women who wear a hijab in the Western society where they have the luxury to live in a secular society. And then they're like, oh, yeah, I'm choosing it. Which, frankly, how many men? There are so many men out there who like to wear women dresses. They like to wear skirts and they want to wear heels. Have you ever seen a man wanting to wear a hijab? Like a man would never, like I've never. So it is not even an article of clothing that you're just choosing. And if you are choosing to wear um, a hijab on your head, to me I equate it with getting a tattoo of swastika on your arm. So you can do it, but I can criticize it. I don't
Mm,
think it is a very good choice. I think it is a symbol of oppression, and you are choosing to don it. And I don't think that anybody should be supporting it. Actually, recently, all these laws that have been passing in Europe where they say don't wear hijab. And when people ask me, like, oh, this is their culture and this is their religion, and we have to respect their choice, I'm like, okay, women in Paris should be free to choose to wear a hijab when women in Kabul are free to choose to take it off.
mm,
Until that happens, this is not a matter of choice. And really, is this a choice? If I give you a choice, I say, oh, you can eat this lollipop and go to heaven, or you can eat this candy and die because it is poisonous and it is going to kill your entire family. Which one are you going to choose?
right.
So it is, and it just does not stop there. Like here in the US, I see kind of like my own mother. It reminds me of my own mother when I see women walking two steps behind their husband. They will not walk side by side, hand in hand. They will be walking behind him, and they will be lowering their gaze, and they will be speaking in a certain way. And I'm like, this is not culture. And unfortunately, I call it a. I actually read a book that was titled Unholy Alliance, and this is almost that unholy alliance that is actually enabling all these people to do all these bad things everywhere else, because over here where you have a power to say that these things are bad, you are actually saying no, 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 these are good because this is their culture and this is their religion.
Mm, David Horowitz. Yeah. It's why do I know David Horowitz? Is he the editor of this is interesting. I'll tell you what my interesting connection is to all of this. My father's entire half of my father's entire career is built around calling out radical Islam. He's conservative himself, and the voices that are most critical of Islam are conservative voices, because the liberal voices are like, it's Islamophobia. It's Islamophobia for you to blah, blah, blah. And I find myself in a very interesting position where I overall identify as liberal, far more than my father, far more gay rights, and far more be who you want to be. But in this area, I completely agree with him. The difference is that he uses it as a weapon for conservatism.
Yeah.
Right? He says we have to limit immigration and we have to fight wars and all this stuff that he uses to support an agenda, which I don't agree with. But the end result, the final, the premise, I actually do agree with. The way I describe it is this is an absolutely important point that that needs to be made in the world. Like it's gay rights, women's rights. It's terrible in religion, but you, my father, do not get to make it because you believe in a parallel religion that says almost the exact same thing. It's not as bad to be Jewish overall than it is to be Muslim, from what I can see broadly. Although there's sects of, I don't know if you know about this, there's sects in Judaism that have just on their own, not even related to text, but culturally become so fanatic that they're also wearing burqas.
Oh,
And yeah, they're wearing burqas and they're like, this is what it means to be Jewish. And everyone looks at them and laughs, right? But 100 years ago, they would be looking at what is normal in Orthodoxy today and laughing because it's getting more and more fanatic all the time. So one of my favorite examples is the entire female educational system in Israel is structured around this one educational school system that was founded by a woman about 100 years ago, like in the 30s. And she was very revolutionary because she started teaching girls who were not taught before. At this point, an Orthodox Jewish woman covers her hair oftentimes with a wig or some sort of other covering and does all sorts of like very stringent laws of modesty that have been introduced. But in the only photos that we have of this woman who started these schools, she did not dress as modestly as they talk about today, because it was a completely different time. And they are left on, this is a very practical apologetics. This isn't explaining the Bible. This is apologetics from the last 100 years explaining why a woman who is the founder of the entire movement of the educational system was not dressing the way you're telling all of your students in the same school system to dress. I love seeing those kinds of things because you see just everybody's doing backflips to try
absolutely.
to make it work.
And Islamophobia, I actually have thought about it a lot, because initially there is all this pushback when you're an ex-Muslim and you're critiquing the ideology. Then they're, oh my God, you are creating all these weapons that are going to be used against Muslims and all that. And I literally say, like, Islamophobia, we have to learn to differentiate between Islamophobia and honest critique of ideology. Number one, Islamophobia is a misnomer because phobia is an irrational fear. And if there is a real threat that somebody can kill me for my beliefs, that's not an irrational fear. And then the second thing is that, really, like you said, there is a difference between discriminating against individuals and critiquing a 7th century ideology. And I'm going to critique the 7th century ideology all day long. You cannot stop me at this point from doing that. That does not mean that I will ever stand behind discrimination against individuals, because that is what I'm fighting against. If I'm not fighting to say that LGBTQ, I mean, God, if you believe in one, created the LGBTQ people. So why does God want you to discriminate against them? I'll tell you why. because they don't reproduce. And a religion's biggest commodity is the small children who they can train and doctrine with their doctrine, like, before their frontal cortex is like fully developed, so that they are more impressionable, and then they will believe in their fairy tales all life long.
Yes.
So because LGBTQ is like essentially wasting their potential to reproduce and create more followers, LGBTQ is bad. And similarly, women who uprise are not going to be baby factories anymore, so they are bad. And anything that is going to lose the control of recreation, it's bad. And well, not recreation, sorry, wrong word, procreation.
Procreation,
So
yeah.
I always say, and you can take it out if you would like, but I actually wrote an article about it, which is like called Islam's breeding kink. Because I'm like, this is kink without consent. You want everybody to just like reproduce like crazy, and anything that is not serving that purpose is titled bad.
Absolutely, yes. We have, it's one of the basic, be fruitful and multiply verse, second verse of Genesis, it's right there in the beginning. I'm the eldest of 9 children. Orthodox Judaism takes that very seriously. And that's, absolutely correct. My criticism, I say about religion, any adult, you can do whatever you want. You want to amputate your right arm and eat it, go ahead. Like, I'm not going to tell you what to do. The biggest issue I have with organized religion is how children end up getting treated in it. They get told that they're going to hell, and they get told that they have to do this law. It is almost impossible to raise someone in a completely neutral environment until they're 20 years old, 25, when their prefrontal cortex fully develops, and
Yeah.
then say, okay, here are your 2 options. What would you like to do? Religion has lots of opinions of what you need to do with a child who's 6 years old, 10 years old, stuff like that. And so it's not, you can do whatever you want, but what you're doing with a child is child abuse.
Yeah.
That is one of my biggest criticisms. Like, teaching about heaven and hell, already child abuse.
Honestly speaking, in Islam, even there is like the saying, it is a hadith from the Prophet where he said that if your children are not praying by the time they are 10, you should beat them. Like, they're actually encouraging physical violence if they're not praying and doing what they're supposed to do. Like, think about this. A girl as young as 9, like even in countries like Iraq right now, the age of consent is 9, and a 9-year-old can get married because they are now adults, and as soon as they hit puberty. So there are instances in Islamic history where when people were taken captive, and there was an instruction that men should be killed and boys should be like just enslaved, um, to basically assess who is a man and who is a boy. They would look at their private parts, and if they have any hair, they'd be like, okay, yeah, this is a man. Like, okay, a barely teenage kid can be quote unquote a man by that definition. That
Yes,
is
that
just
is
so
literally
cruel.
the definition in Judaism. People know about bar mitzvahs and they think, oh, bar mitzvahs is a 13 years old, blah, blah, blah. But according to the letter of the law and how it is written in the entire rabbinical text, which I bet a lot of Jews don't even know, is someone who has 2 hairs, and 2 hairs is 2 pubic hairs specifically. So the parallels continue throughout. Then you're a man, right? Now you're a man, all of that. It's entirely tied into puberty, and it's got all the laws associated with it. So I'm curious. So in the last 5 years, there's this activism and the courage to move to speak out. And I guess I have 2 questions for you about that. One is, how did you find the courage to speak out? It is far more dangerous to do that. And then, what has that looked like? What has your activism been?
So initially, I just started speaking in smaller circles, and I started like when I would find someone who is doubting and they have questions, I would just be honest in my answer. And I would not like try to sugarcoat it or whatever, or try to hide my own identity. And then over time, I literally like in sort of a self therapy type of session, I was like, okay, I'm going to like start journaling and writing my own story. And then the more I wrote, the more I was like, this is not about me. This is really more about the ideology, and this is about the patterns that it creates and how it impacts people around it. So then I decided to formally start working on my book, and I started working on it. Then the more I wrote my book, the more I was like, okay, there are even other things that I want to say. So, after all the editing, it is like a, I don't know, 359 pages. I cannot write like a 2000 page long book. So I was like, okay, then I'm going to blog, and I'm going to start like publicly speaking up. So then I started blogging, I started tweeting, I started like talking on Instagram. Now obviously I have not done any of that under my legal name, because again, I'm not suicidal. Some crazy person is going to find me if they figure out who I actually am. So I do all of that under a pen name, but the positives that it has brought to me are actually I can take the risk that is there because of the positive side of it. It has literally healed me more than anything else, because I have been able to speak my truth. I have found my community where I've figured out that I'm not just the only crazy person. There are other people who speak up and who feel the same way and who see the same things that I've seen. And I it helps me learn. But I think that the community aspect of it is the biggest one. And the beautiful thing is that that community is not just an ex-Muslim community. It is like ex Christians and ex Jews and ex Hindus and people who have all these doubts about the things that they were taught and how they were, and how we can relate to each other and where we find our morality, which is, by the way, the most common question that I get from Muslim people. Where do you find your morality? Like, what is stopping you from becoming a monster? Like, okay, you are the one who is standing behind slavery and child marriage and wife beating. I am not the one standing behind those principles, so I can literally say that one of us is more moral in this situation, and that's not you. But where I find my morality is in compassion. It is in the desire to minimize suffering of other people. And that is my truth. And the more I have found that community, the more I have found answers to those kind of questions. Where do I find my morality? What does compassion mean? What does it need to look like for me going forward? What do I teach my kids? So those are the kind of things that I think have made a huge difference.
Amazing. Where did you find where do you find your community? Is it in online groups? Is it people in your city that you can actually interact with?
The funny thing is that the first person that I interacted with was a longtime friend who I went into long debates with about how I used to say and try to prove to him that Quran was the truth. And he used to be like, okay, you don't know what you're talking about. Literally, the day I realized when I was reading the Quran that I don't believe in this anymore, he was the first person I called. And I was like, oh my god, I don't know what to do, I don't know how to deal with this, I'm like really struggling. And I think that was the start of the community. But really, where I found the bigger connection and community is in the online forums. So the other thing that happened so the way my book goes is that I have tackled like various different subjects, topics, and then within those topics, what I do is in each chapter I share like a few short true stories of true people that it has actually happened and how it has impacted them and what is their story. Just a couple pages, not a whole lot lingering like long novel or anything. So that actually helped me create a community a lot, because connecting with all these people, interviewing them, hearing their stories, what happened in their journey, like all of that. And I'm still connected to them, I still talk to them. I'm like, that was beginning of a very strong community. And then now I'm connected to ex-Muslims of North America. I found some very good friends, like one of my friends, Sammy, she actually makes haram doodles. So she she does all this doodling and she makes these beautiful doodles, and that's her way of expression, and it's just beautiful. So that is like one example that I can think on top of my head, that in a very short time we have become very close and very good friends. And yes, it is mostly an online community, but social media is a real part of our life now.
For sure. So can you briefly tell me like the title of the book and what it's about?
Sure, my book is called Born a Burden. breaking free from Islam, tradition, and silence. And really, what it is about, I started writing it as what does it mean to be born a woman in a very conservative Muslim society? But then from there, it expanded to including stories of men who were impacted. And how, what does it mean for them? And how does, so I realized somewhere along the way that actually it's not just women who are born a burden in this religion, it's all of us. All of us are born a burden in this religion, and this burden is placed on our shoulders that we are supposed to carry. So instead of climbing the mountain, we are just carrying the mountain on our shoulder and we are buried under it. So really what it is about, it literally starts in the very, very childhood, how a girl child is often like even unwanted and why. And then it takes to a journey of seeds of doubt, like how do various people actually experience like that first doubt, that first moment of doubt. And from there it carries into the other realities of life, even our married life, how, what the different aspects that Islam impacts our married life, our family life, our relationship with our parents, and you as a parent. And then it goes into immigration, and how the kind of the point that we were talking about, that some people actually carry that ideology into western suburbs. And what does that look like and what does that mean? In the end, I've tried very hard, because for this kind of a book it is very hard to give it a positive closure, because there is so much trauma and so much like pain inside it. But I have tried to, people whose stories I've shared, I've talked to them, and a lot of them have actually found the meaning and found the purpose. And I think that there is our closure. It is not about have we fully healed, but it is really about what have our scars taught us. What is the wisdom that we have gained from our pain, and that is really how we close it.
I love that. And based on that, like, what would you say if I were to turn that question to you? And maybe you would say everything that you've already said, but is there anything you would add as to what your, I guess, scars have taught you?
My scar has taught me that burning is temporary, liberation is permanent. So, my scars have taught me that if we keep walking and if we keep learning, there is a light at the end of the day. And the best thing that we can do when we reach that light is to actually try to extend our hand to others who are struggling. And that's what I have learned from my own journey. I don't think that my journey is about anger or rebellion. My journey is about awakening.
Mm, yeah, I love that. And when your book is probably full of advice, and you've already given some today. Is there anything else that you would advise or recommend to somebody who's just starting out on that journey, deconstructing? It would be Islam or any other religion.
Like I said, keep
Keep
walking,
walking.
keep learning, keep talking to other people, keep reading. Because eventually you will get to the truth and you will find your path. Just do not accept what other people tell you. Like it is easy and it is comforting to accept an apologetic answer and just say, oh yeah, this makes me feel better about what I've been believing for a good part of my life, so I'm just going to take it and just call it a day. Because in that way you will never get to the truth. Can I ask you a question?
Yes, in fact, at the end of the podcast, one of the questions is, "Do you have any questions for me?" So I appreciate you taking the initiative there.
Okay. So, my question for you is that if you could go back to the self where, that first moment of doubt came, and I asked like a lot of people that I interviewed for my book, I asked that question. So, I'm very curious to hear your answer. Would you change anything? Would you say that I'm more comfortable the way I am and I would rather not know? Or would you rather say, no, I still want to walk this path and I still want to go through this journey and I still want to deconstruct?
You're saying, when you say moment of doubt, you mean just that turning point for my personal
Yes.
experience of when I decided to go. It was the best thing I ever did in my life. In fact, I measure my life. I started living when that happened, from that moment on. Until that point, I was not making choices of my own free will. I don't believe in free will, but like the sense of free will that we have in our lives, that was being dictated. Every aspect of my life was being dictated by an external force. This is when you wake up. This is what you're going to do with your day. This is what you're going to think. This is what you're going to say and act and feel. And so that was when I began to live. And it's only been about, I think, 9 or 10 years now. I'm losing count, which is a very good thing. It's just about 10 years. So yeah, it was the best thing I've ever done. It was very painful. But I stepped into freedom, is how I describe it. Like I stepped out of prison in the mind, prison in society, and I began to live my life. So 100% I would recommend.
Absolutely. I love that answer. So, it is like you said, it is actually a freedom. And you know how with AI, now we say that if you basically ask ChatGPT to type every memo that you ever write, then over time your brain, you will lose the ability to type that memo yourself. And that is very true. Your human brain is use it or lose it. And AI is not the only thing that we should be scared of. We should actually be very scared of religion that has been around for thousands of years, because it takes away your ability to think critically. Like you said, it tells you who to be, what to do, how to spend your day, what to wear. Like everything, every question you have, you never have to think critically about it. And there is a ready-made answer for you out of the book, and that's what you're going to do. So over time, people who actually they lose their ability to think critically, and they lose their ability to say, to differentiate between right and wrong. And I think that is a very dangerous thing. I would rather have my ability to think critically versus not.
Exactly. Yeah, I completely agree. My most recent article on my site is called "Oversimplification," and I believe the biggest crime that religion commits, that extreme nationalism commits, is a black and white thinking. And it basically says this is good and this is not good. And the appeal is that it absolves you of nuance and the weight of very complicated decisions that need to be made. That will have, each thing you do will have a lot of painful consequences the other way. That is life. Life is full of that. And religion says, don't worry about it. Let me take care of it. Those people, they're all bad, and all the suffering is for a reason. And when you die, it's all going to be okay. And everything becomes simple and black and white. And there is a relief in the short term of what are, of carrying that. And I think as children, we all need very black and white fairy tales kind of thing. But as you mature, teenager, adulthood, you're supposed to become more and more nuanced. And religion cuts that short. So like my father, my parents, they still think and act like an 8-year-old in a lot of ways because of this aspect of like, oh, don't worry about it. No, if you're not Jewish, you're worthless, and so it doesn't really matter. And then you parrot some other things, but it makes things very easy and very black and white. And then I have lots of examples of it, but that is kind of, I think, really speaks to the point you're making.
Yeah, my mother said to me the other day that it hurts her to see that I always try to help other people. Like, since I was a child, that is my thing. I always try to help other people. So she was like, you help everybody, and everybody, like, you are such a nice person, and it hurts me to see that you will go to hell. And I was like, okay, like that was nice, mom. Thank you very much. But I was like, why would you say that? And she's like, because you don't believe in Islam, so obviously you are going to go to hell. So I said, you know what? If there is a God and they are more worried about whether you believe in them or not versus whether you are a good human being or not, you know what? I would rather be in hell with the rest of the humanity. That's fine.
Exactly. As I reached a point, I think I left out with a lot of anger, and I was like, even if I go to hell, this is where I want to be,
Yeah.
basically. And like, I don't want to, like, heaven is like, you get to spend all day with God. Well, God is an asshole, and I don't want to spend time with him. I think the cool people are all in hell. That's one way to,
Absolutely, absolutely. All the scientists in hell, all the artists in hell. I would rather be
yeah,
with them. The funny thing is that for Muslim heaven, one of the big incentives is that men get all these virgins that they are going to, eternal virgins that they're going to be with. And I'm like, what does that make me if my husband is going to be with all these eternal virgins? I would rather be in hell. I don't want to be in that heaven.
Exactly. What do you get?
Exactly. And
72 virgin men. What
like,
an appeal.
I don't want my husband to be with all these women. Like, I'm okay with his cheating and sleeping around. Like, thank you very much. That doesn't sound very appealing to me.
Yeah, exactly. I love it. And one last question for you, just on the practical front. In addition to your book, you also blog a lot. Where can people find your blog posts?
So right now I blog on Medium, and I also do a Substack. My Substack is a lot more storytelling. My Medium is more like analysis and research and that kind of thing. I'm going to share those links with you. I am working furiously on my website. So once I have that, I will share that with you. And I would love to look at your website as well. But, frankly speaking, I usually use a crew in Pakistan to do my websites, and I cannot use them for this one. So I'm trying to do it myself.
That's very
It's
fair.
gonna take a while because I'm very busy with everything else.
Exactly. Well, talk to me. I'm a web designer by trade,
Oh
so
my
that's how
God, that's
yeah, I'll
fantastic.
help you out.
Maybe you can guide me through it.
Exactly. I use my forces for evil. In fact, it's funny. For many years, even when I left religion, I was still working. I needed the money, and I was working for an Orthodox Jewish conglomerate of news websites. And everything they put out, I disagreed with. Every part of it. They're pro-Trump. They're far right. They do all of the stuff that I didn't believe in anymore. And they're idolizing rabbis who I think are basically evil or at least misguided. And I was working for them because I needed to, but I opened up Freedom Fighter on the side using the same skills, and I basically was like, "Oh, this is the carbon offset of the work that I'm doing by day. At least in the nighttime, I can balance this out instead." So that's me. I'm definitely happy to help you out with your website as well.
Thank you very much. I really
Yeah,
appreciate it.
for sure. So Nushuz, this was amazing. Thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate your candor and courage. It takes a lot more courage to speak out against Islam, and I think you're doing it really well, and it's very, very needed. And I think to do it from a place where in other aspects, not in other aspects, you are actually liberal, I think it's more rare because this is a voice that is found in conservatism, and it doesn't deserve to be in conservatism because they are part of the problem. They are a mirror expression just in another religion. So I think liberal people need to be speaking out in a way that is not nearly often done enough. So you're doing God's work.
Absolutely. No, I completely agree with you because that does catch me by surprise because I'm like, if you're going to stop all immigration, there are a lot of doubting people and closeted ex Muslims in, for example, places like Pakistan. They want an out. They don't want to be stuck in that country forever. Like,
Exactly.
we have to be able to critique an ideology, but not discriminate against individual people.
Yes, exactly. And it creates a lot of dilemmas, and that's the topic for another time. But it's definitely the baseline has to start somewhere.
Yeah.
So thank you again.
You're most welcome. Very nice to meet you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Beyond Belief. If you found the episode inspiring, please share it with others who might benefit from it, and be sure to subscribe to it to get updates about future episodes.